You're listening to Contesting Wrestling. My name is Evan Burke, and I don't care for wrestling. Already, if you're confused if this is the first episode you're listening to, as people often are when they try to engage me about wrestling. They're like, I heard you have a wrestling podcast. I'm like, I do. They're like, did you watch wrestling this week? I'm like, I didn't. I don't care for wrestling. And they're like, why do you have a wrestling podcast then? And I'm like, well, now we have to get into it. Now it's going to be a whole thing. But one thing that, so not liking wrestling is something that I have in common with most people. And that's a thing that...
Apparently like 50% of adults, according to recent polls, have never watched wrestling.
Have never watched wrestling.
And
then like another 48% have watched it and are like, no thank you.
Well, most of those people watched it as kids and don't watch it anymore. And then like 20 to 30% of that original 50% still watch it.
To be fair, I know the polls Ben are referring to, and about 10 to 15% of those people don't know if they've ever seen wrestling. So that's about as good as an individual poll is.
I think that means they blocked it out.
I mean, if you've seen wrestling, still isn't the whole point that you still don't know if you've seen wrestling or not, right? That's kind of the thing.
I think the WWE would like that.
Now
it's a big part of this podcast that people don't actually know what wrestling is when they see it.
So I dragged my friends along with me into podcast land here because the three people whom I co-host this with are all huge wrestling fans. Love it as much as a person can love a thing. And that's just hard for me to square, right? You know, that's like, so sometimes you have a friend that you really love who seems like an interesting, intelligent, compassionate, who is not just seems like, genuinely is those things. And then you're like, well, what's your favorite movie? And then and even though I don't believe that personal taste necessarily corresponds to like your, real beliefs or values as a person or something like that. Like if somebody was just like, oh, my absolute favorite movie of all time is, what was it, Down the River or whatever, the movie with Matthew Lillard and Seth Green from Without a Paddle. That movie.
Without a Paddle.
If somebody was like,
both of their lowest moments.
Without a Paddle is better than fucking Citizen Kane, better than Star Wars, better than any other. You would be like, we need to work this out. You would be, I need to, no pun intended, square this circle. I don't think that's the expression.
The world is square.
It works, yeah. And so that's what we're doing here. So is trying to understand what's good. Now, I will definitely say if you are trying to get somebody like me into wrestling, if you are somebody who is like one of my co-hosts, who I will eventually allow themselves to introduce themselves, if you are one of them and you are trying to get somebody like me into wrestling, a great way to do it would be to show them a series of matches starring the late, great Eddie Guerrero. But before we get into those, let's round out this introductory phase.
Well, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in wrestling for about a dozen years. I've done a little bit of everything. I've done ring announcing, commentary, wrestling, all kinds of stuff backstage, in front of the camera, etc., you name it. I have been watching wrestling since 1992, consistently, and I've seen a lot of it. I'm not even sure if I've seen as much as one of my other co-hosts here, who watches a tremendous amount of wrestling, and at times I'm jealous with as much as he could consume. So, Professor, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College, and a person who loves the thing that is pro wrestling, and certainly does consume quite a lot of it.
And last but not least, it is me, Katie Vella. I am also in love with pro wrestling, much to my own detriment. I've been watching wrestling since 2003, the worst year to start watching pro wrestling in the history of wrestling. I've been in the wrestling business since 2014, and I've been reffing 3 years since 2017, 3 years next month. And without further ado, we continue our journey in making Evan love Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
We are going to be looking at latter day Eddie Guerrero here. His 2015 heel turn. His
2005.
I'm sorry, time is a meaningless circle.
His
2005
rise-
title reign and heel turn, just
matters.
fantastic.
2004 title reign. 2005 heel turn.
I've been watching wrestling since 1992, folks. Thank you, Ben.
Now, all right. So this episode is actually going to do two things. The first thing is we're going to continue our examination of Eddie Guerrero, and we're gonna and talk about why he's great. Talk about maybe some of the things I've learned about wrestling while we're watching. But this episode watching the matches for this kind of brought something else into sharp relief for me. And I, in the spirit of wrestling, am going to take something that really is like a backstage issue that I was going to bring up when we have our business meeting after we're done recording, and I'm going to bring it up on air to make it both interesting radio and an interesting show.
We have business meetings?
And I get this if you loosely want to use that term to describe when we figure out our schedules after we record. We've been doing this a year now, right? We've been doing this a while.
Yeah.
And I am kind of running out of shit to say about a lot of matches. Now, today was really interesting because it's everything that I watched for today started off with a match that I was like, I'm gonna have to fucking tell the guys I can't do this podcast anymore because I'm dry. I have nothing. I can't, even though I'm somebody who, for better or for worse, can kind of just make shit up and as I go and like say and then eventually it kind of turns interesting. Like I'm just running out. Like I'm watching this match, the first match we're doing, which is Brock versus Eddie, and it's
yeah.
You say you're dry, Evan. You know they have special creams for that.
I am beslathered round the clock. But this is a metaphorical dryness, so unless you can send me to some sort of a metaphorical dermatologist, it's not going to help.
I kind of anticipated something like this from you, Evan, because of that first match in particular between Brock Lesnar and Eddie Guerrero for the WWE title at No Way Out, 2004. One, because it was a Brock Lesnar match.
Yes.
And we already know how you feel about Brock Lesnar matches. And this one, and we'll get into the specifics in a little bit. This one I thought is more interesting than your typical Brock Lesnar match.
I agree, absolutely.
And yet, I was thinking as I was watching the matches, like, Evan is going to get a sense by now for how wrestling matches work, for the sort of general patterns that they fall into. And I worried as I was watching it, you know, maybe it's losing its luster.
You know me so well, dude. It's amazing. Because here's the problem. Because then, you know, I watched this. Then I watched. I would say my real low point, and we'll get into the matches in detail later. But like a real low point came watching the Eddie Kurt Angle match, where I was like, these are two wrestlers that I love. That like I've watched all their stuff and thought it was really great, and I have nothing to say about, like, I'm like, oh, I can be like, oh, this part was good. Oh, it was cool. Oh, it's interesting because they have a contrast of styles. Like the same shit that I've been saying every fucking match.
We need to get back to showing you bad stuff.
In all fairness, I kind of had the same feeling watching that match, that specific match. Like, I'm like, this is very incredible on a technical level, but I have nothing like of note to go into.
Yeah. I agree as well. I have not a ton in my notes, not a ton to say about the actual match. I have a lot to say about the stories leading into it. Into all of these matches. A lot more about the stories than the matches themselves.
We need to show Evan more bad stuff. Might I suggest the 2004 Diva Surge?
I don't know if that's going to be the answer to my frustration. I'll be honest with you.
It'll be really entertaining.
There is that.
But
Here's what it is. I don't want to be intellectually dishonest, right? I don't want to be artistically dishonest, and there is now a concern that I have developed an opinion of wrestling that I don't know how much more it's going to develop. Like I don't like I like like if I could have a conversation with somebody about wrestling, I could explain why I do think it's like why people kind of shit on it, and perhaps they shouldn't. I can express my process, or talk about my process of learning what made it interesting. But I also I feel cognizant of the fact that if this podcast ended tomorrow, I don't know if I would ever watch or think about wrestling again.
You would have trouble not, considering how much we've damaged you
obviously,
mentally.
well, that was that was the hallmark of our friendships for many years. Now, the last act of today, certainly is I would guess a high point of wrestling storytelling throughout the last 100 years of wrestling. And I certainly have more things to say about it. I certainly perked up when we were doing it, but like I'm going to guess that there are not a ton of moments like this throughout the history of wrestling, right?
Not a ton.
Yeah.
I think what I'll say to your general concern here is, like I was saying, and Katie was saying that, we don't have a ton to say about these like specific matches necessarily outside of the stories that laid into them, the characters, how those characters developed because of the matches and things like that. I think for you, and the way I see the mission of the podcast going forward, now that you sort of have come to understand what wrestling is and how it works, is just to see you react to the variety of characters and storylines that you haven't seen yet and that we can still teach you about.
Because I don't want to stop doing this. I like doing this. I like that our small community of fans that we have built seem to largely be lovely people that I enjoy interacting with. I love you guys. I just don't want to. I just don't want to lie. I just don't want to lie to the people. Well, I'm not a wrestler in that sense.
Let me put it to you this way, Evan. If you don't want to stop doing this, and that's great because we don't want to stop you doing this, I don't necessarily think you see the worth in certain little things. Like when we watched Eddie Guerrero versus Ric Flair, and you said something like that time Flair like fell on his face. Like that, to the wrestling fan listener, is pure gold. Because every wrestling fan knows that spot, and every wrestling fan is thrilled that somebody who hasn't seen it before thinks it's really notable, because Ric Flair did it in every match for 30 years. Jesus. But yeah, just stuff like that. You bring a lot to the table just by reacting to stuff like that. Even if it's not the eternal struggle. It wasn't going to be the struggle forever. I mean, you've seen a lot of wrestling by now. And that's my take on that.
Also, we're going to have a lot more guests as this goes along, and seeing you interact with those guests and hearing their perspectives and how they might conflict with or confirm things that you think. Going also in our business meeting later, I was going to suggest us doing an episode with a friend of mine who is doing one of our film episodes for the premium, with a friend of mine who is also not a wrestling fan and doesn't know anything about wrestling, and seeing how, that interaction might go. So I think we still have plenty of ground to cover. But it's not going to be the same kind of like 101 education that it was to this point.
That's good to hear. And I'm doing this in part because, like, as I'm editing the episodes and stuff, like, I guess I wanted to say to our listeners too, like, I know that I've been kind of repeating myself a lot, like, lately, because I find myself, I don't want to just come in and be like, fuck this, or be like, I was bored. Like, of course I want to bring something constructive and interesting to the table, and after a while, like, yeah, I started, like, I felt like there are only so many times I can be like, it's cool because they have two different ways of wrestling. Also, it sort of reminds me of a thing I studied in college. Like, and I feel like that's just all I'm doing. To be
fair, Evan, you did sign the blood contract, though. There was a whole ritual and everything.
No, and the collector comes at night to take a part of my soul each evening as stipulated in the contract, and I have to keep doing this. Like, I know that. I get that.
A lot of the things that I like hearing from you, especially, are, and what I'm sort of hoping to hear from you in this episode, for instance, is just like seeing Eddie Guerrero do his thing and, look at him from the perspective of someone who understands TV and film and it's like, oh, he's doing this kind of acting.
Well,
you know what I mean? And he's doing this thing that wrestling fans might not have the touch tones to describe for themselves.
And that is interesting. That is a good point that you bring up there, because I did have the thought while we were watching this that there is this Eddie Guerrero, of every wrestler that I have seen so far, is the best at this weird kind of thing that I guess is acting. Right? It's not something
something like that. Yeah.
I don't know if you could have put him on a TV show.
No.
I don't think that it would like work in that sense, but at the same time he's way better at it than the overwhelming majority of wrestlers I have ever seen. In his ability to do acting, basically, like to play a character and inhabit a role and express things with his face and his body, which I know if you describe acting and wrestling, it can sound almost exactly the same, but they're obviously radically different. And also, I just, as a side note, he really does sound like the Mexican Roddy Piper a little bit.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
he really does, yeah.
Since you said that, like especially here late in his career, he sounds a lot like Roddy Piper.
Yeah.
In these last promos, his delivery, just the way you can tell he adds words here and there, just to flare it up a bit. Yeah, very Piper.
And I was watching it with our friend Charlie, and he compared him to Bobcat Goldthwait.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I could totally see it. Where it's like uncomfortable to hear him talk.
Right, especially when he's a heel. As he becomes more and more of a heel, he just like his voice gets gravelly in a really irritating kind of way, and he's like constantly going into that high register that's unnatural for his voice, and he knows it, and he knows that it's making the people annoyed with him and angry at him, and that's really the thing that he is so fucking gifted at, is controlling the audience, making them either love or hate him with an expression, with just by looking at the camera in the right way. He conveys a multiplicity of emotions that you feel very viscerally. And we'll get into the specifics of that, particularly with the later part of this story for today. But Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say sometimes he doesn't even need to talk.
Right.
Like, he doesn't need to use words.
I can't really think of anybody that I have seen so far who could pull that off.
That blew
Only
all
Eddie,
of our
man.
minds when it happened. And
Only
watching
Eddie, holy shit.
I haven't seen it since it happened, but it blew my mind again.
That blew my fucking 16-year-old mind.
Well, a little spoiler. That's the Eddie Guerrero silent promo from the May 19th, 2005 SmackDown. We'll talk
what?
about it in detail.
May what?
May 19th.
May 19th.
All right, let's dive in. Let's dive into the matches.
Okay, so I have a big story to tell for this episode, because these matches and this period in wrestling history have a ton of personal, emotional significance for myself.
Same,
I know
yeah.
for Doc as well, and Katie as well.
I was only like 2 years into watching wrestling. All this shit was still like really heavy emotional shit for me.
While I was not watching wrestling at the time, 2004 to like 2006 was the darkest period of my life too. So I think it was just like, yeah.
So, all right. So, January 2004, Chris Benoit wins the fucking Royal Rumble. And we're all like, holy shit, they're actually giving it to Benoit. They're actually going with Benoit. We had been fans of his for over a decade. He was one of these guys who we thought was never going to get his due. He wins the Royal Rumble, and we're like, all right, he's going to go on to WrestleMania to wrestle Brock Lesnar, and maybe he'll beat him for the title at WrestleMania. Because at that point, if a SmackDown guy won the Royal Rumble, he'd challenge the SmackDown World Champion. If a Raw guy won, he'd challenge the Raw World Champion. But then,
Well, hold on. I'd like to place Brock for a second here in that, because it means something different than it does now. Now, Brock, as soon as he debuted, was big final boss, of course, but he wasn't like the decades tenured, you're clearly not getting past him, Brock Lesnar. If you hear that they would do Benoit versus Lesnar, there was a pretty good chance you'd think Benoit would win because of his tenure.
He almost beat him on SmackDown one week, but Paul Heyman cheated.
I kind of vaguely remember that, yeah.
As opposed to today, where Lesnar comes out and, like, you're surprised if anybody lasts 5 minutes with him, let alone somebody beats him. Like, that's a whole different story.
So the night after the Royal Rumble, Benoit shows up on Raw as a total surprise and instead challenges Triple H for the world title.
I just want to put into context here about, you said Brock Lesnar, and the way Brock Lesnar at the time, it was more believable that Benoit would beat Brock Lesnar than Benoit beating Triple H. So when Benoit showed up in Raw, it's like, I'm going to fight Triple H, we were like, God damn it.
The segment on Raw was Triple H was face-to-face with Shawn Michaels, and they were like, we're going to do this one more time at WrestleMania. And then Benoit comes out and is just like, nah, I'm here now. Also, it was more realistic to think that Benoit would beat Brock Lesnar than to think Eddie Guerrero would beat Brock Lesnar.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
And just to preface this all, I do know we put a disclaimer in the last episode, but this is us like describing our feelings at the time. Yes. Like Benoit, it became a monster that killed. Y'all know, but like this, we have to put into context that this is how we felt at the time. You know,
this is part of why the whole thing is so problematic for us.
Yes, it's very nuanced and it hurts to watch a lot of the time.
So Benoit's going to face Triple H and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania for the title. So then it's like, so what are they going to do about the SmackDown title? So on SmackDown that week, they make a special Royal Rumble, a special 15-man Royal Rumble. And by the way, it's a real fucking Royal Rumble. They don't usually mention it when they talk about all the Royal Rumbles, but they promoted it as the first time the Royal Rumble was going to be on SmackDown. So
the SmackDown Rumble, yeah.
The SmackDown Rumble. So I actually missed that episode at the time. I remember our friend Spoon calling me up and being like, dude, you have no idea what happened. Like, you won't believe what happened on SmackDown this week. They had another Royal Rumble and fucking Eddie Guerrero won. At the time, Eddie Guerrero was feuding with Chavo. He wasn't anywhere near the main event. And now all of a sudden it's like, wait a second. He's going to fight Brock Lesnar at No Way Out for the title. It's possible that both Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero could be in world title matches at fucking WrestleMania 20 at Madison Square Garden that we all have tickets for already?
Our hopes were low. I didn't have tickets, but it was going to be the very first WrestleMania that I ever watched, you know, because I had just started watching wrestling about half a year prior, you know. I started watching intermittently in March of 2003, and by the summer I was hooked.
Word. Yeah, that's usually about how long it takes. But 10 years previous, I had not gotten tickets for WrestleMania 10 and watched it on pay-per-view, and my favorite wrestler, Bret Hart, won the title, and that was a great moment, but I wasn't there for it. Now, 10 years later, I was gonna fucking be there for my basically two favorite wrestlers of the 5 or 10 years previous, finally getting their shot at WrestleMania. Possibly. If Eddie Guerrero could beat fucking Brock Lesnar at No Way Out. Where it was like, well, the story makes it seem like, like Eddie should win this match, but Brock, he's going to beat Brock Lesnar? And it reminds me of one of my favorite movies, 1953's Robot Monster, where Roman says, I must, but I cannot. Where on the map do must and where on the graph do must and cannot meet? And that's what makes for a great fucking wrestling match, right? It's like it should go this way, but it can't go that way. What the fuck is going to happen? And this sets the stage for Brock Lesnar versus Eddie Guerrero for the WWE title at No Way Out 2004.
Cool. So,
And well, I guess Eddie Guerrero also is coming back from his fucking being fired for being a drunk and a drug addict, and so this is also his redemption story leading into No Way Out.
Vince has always loved a good redemption story. He likes giving people another chance, and if they seize upon it, he'll go right with that. And Eddie Guerrero is a perfect candidate for that, having been, fired and come back. And they leaned all the way into it, in the promos beforehand and everything with, Brock Lesnar calling Eddie Guerrero an addict and Eddie Guerrero saying, I'm addicted to the fans, which I mean is a little pandering, but the whole, he sold it so well because they did recognize, he was in some really dark places. That doesn't mean he can't come back and be the best.
I'm addicted to the fans and barbiturates.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Brock says, I hope you're addicted to losing. And then during the match, when like Eddie fires up at the beginning, he's like, all right, let's get high, Holmes.
Oh, Eddie. So they have this match. It's a little longer than I remember it being.
It's a little longer than
it's way longer than I remember
that's
it being.
ever happened in my life.
Yeah, and they do a good job of building the crowd to the end. But you see, like, they do a thing where when they do the entrances, they'll cut the music and they'll just let the crowd keep cheering, which they don't do.
I remembered something about this pay-per-view too just now. I had just started ordering pay-per-views regularly. That like December, my mom had started like letting me get them, and I remember I decided to skip this one, and then Eddie won the title, and then I never let us skip another one again. Like, for the next 2 years, it's like, no, we have to fucking get this pay-per-view, Mom. Or else I might fucking miss Eddie winning the goddamn title again.
So, Evan, I agree. Like, this match was a lot longer than I expected. It was a little too long. But you got to understand, like, this is where you aren't a wrestling fan yet, right? Us being so fucking excited for this match and the possibility that Eddie could win the title, but thinking that he couldn't possibly do it. We were on the edge of our seat for every single turn in momentum in this match. And there are probably too many of them looking back at it, but we did not care at the time. It's like, oh shit, Eddie's actually getting some damage on Brock Lesnar. He put him in the fucking STF. Holy shit. Oh no, Brock's killing him again. Oh no, but Eddie's coming back again, Like,
how many
it could have gone on forever and we would have been just as excited.
How many casual wrestling fans do you know? Like, when I say a casual fan, I mean somebody who... So, wrestling fans are consuming 3 to 15 hours of new wrestling a week, right? In addition to whatever you're watching. And then wrestling non-fans are what we are is society. It's everybody else who are watching non-wrestling. And then, like, outside of somebody who, like, enjoyed it as a child and, like, when they're flipping channels will, like, keep on it for a few minutes, but then like, they're not really... How many people kind of follow wrestling in your experience?
I don't really know any of them.
I used to know a lot of them. And over the last 20 years, that number has dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, and it has not picked up at any point.
There used to be the guys who watched Raw. Like, I remember being in college. There were the guys who would watch Raw, and the next morning, standing in the courtyard smoking cigarettes, we'd shoot the shit about it.
Ooh, cigarettes!
But I think
don't
Doc
tell our
is
moms.
Right. Yeah, I think Doc is right that those fans have largely dwindled.
Those fans will still talk to you about early 2000s and late 90s WWF all day long, but it's been 15, 20 years since then.
Because I wonder if the real barrier here, like, I used to wonder if you could be a wrestling fan without nostalgia. Without having, and I do think you can.
You can.
But it does seem like you cannot, Like, cause that's like I'm watching this match and like it was a fine match. Like I don't really have like I'm like busting balls about how long it is, and like it certainly could have used some editing, but like I didn't really have a problem with it or anything like that. And I also
No, I mean, what I would say is you can be a new fan without nostalgia. You not Raw though. Raw just keeps losing and losing viewers, and its average demographic just keeps getting higher and higher. AEW though gets new fans.
Yeah, we actually do, as wrestling fans, look a bit at the ratings and the demographics, and that's specifically what it is. The average age of the Raw viewer is over 50. The average age of the AEW viewer is under 35. It's as simple as that. The people watching Raw have been watching Raw for 20 years, and most of the people who were watching Raw 20 years ago have just stopped.
So I'm wondering if it's just if there's no way that in order to be a wrestling fan, you have to be all the way in, because there's no way to actually enjoy all these matches without all of that context. And there's no way to get all of that context without being all the way in.
Well, there's context and there's context. Like, if you watch the big pay-per-views, I do know people, Michael Muhammad Knight, the author, I see his Facebook posts, and these days he watches WrestleMania. That's pretty much it from Dota. Every year he watches WrestleMania. I think he watches some New Japan and stuff, but you could watch the occasional pay-per-view or like the big pay-per-views and basically know what's going on enough to enjoy the matches because you kind of get the stories. There's also a ton of wrestling fans who don't watch a lot of wrestling, but read about a lot of wrestling or listen to podcasts or just see shit on their social media feeds.
Yeah, they won't watch Raw or SmackDown, but they'll watch Cultaholic listicles on YouTube all day.
I guess it's kind of like how I stopped watching The Walking Dead after season 2, but I did continue reading the recaps up until like very recently. What is happening here?
I stopped watching it around mid-season 7, and then I kept reading the recaps, and I'm like, I don't need to watch this anymore.
No,
it's
bad.
Everyone is dead. That spoiler. Yeah. That's The Walking Dead. Every episode past
spoiler
like
of The
7.
Walking Dead. They're all dead.
They're all
and it's not
dead.
They're not.
I will say, the comic book stayed good until the end.
They did, yes. Oh, the comic book stayed. That's the problem. That became the problem for me. Is they veered so far off the comics and lost what the whole idea was supposed to be.
Yeah. And even I know what happens on Monday Night Raw every week. I don't fucking watch Monday Night Raw.
No, I watch reports. I watch the main events at this point. I don't watch the weekly. And yeah, I also know what's on it. That's why I don't watch it.
Last night I read the review of SmackDown from this week. I saw that the reviewer made a very good case for watching the final segment. So I went and found the video of the final segment, and it was good. With Roman Reigns and Jey Uso.
I will say I know more people who have only been into wrestling for a few years that have no use for all of this context, who are only fans of independent wrestling. This is a whole different kind of fandom. They see the community of going to your local show, meeting your friends who are the other fans, seeing the wrestlers in person where they're still like above you in a pleasing way because you're going to see them, but they're accessible. You see them wrestle, then you go to the table where they themselves, sweaty in their tights, are trying to sell you a t-shirt and you get to talk to them about the match. And a lot of these new indie fans don't care for the WWE. And I'd like to, I hear everything that you're saying, Evan, and everything that you're saying is valid, but I think what you're saying would be a lot more correct if instead of saying, can you be a fan of wrestling without this context, you say, can you be a fan of the WWE without this context?
That is an excellent
very difficult.
Distinction.
In the 1980s, DC Comics crunched all of their various shit together because it had gotten out of control. There was too much context. They had like 70 years of context or something. So they were like, we're cutting out about 80% of our stuff. We're going to do a big storyline to explain it. Bunch of characters are just going to go away and it'll free us all up to just do what we want. And it worked.
And now they've done that about 5 times.
Yeah,
in the last 10 years.
I mean, has it worked every time?
No.
No, but it worked very well the first time.
Yeah.
But the WWE can't do that because these are all real people.
And I want to just say, like, Evan, one thing that I think has hindered your development as a wrestling appreciator
Not
is
fans too far.
Yeah, is the fact that we haven't been able to take you to any live shows.
Yeah, I'll give you
COVID.
that. I'll fucking give you that, certainly. Oh, man, tonight, it's fucked up, man. We're recording this on September 25th. 25th or 26th? 25th.
Who cares? It doesn't matter.
It's the 26th for the record.
I'm gonna have one friend over tonight for the first time since Ben came and gave me the mic that I'm using right now, which we had at his house for when we were recording in March. And like that was like March 18th, I think. You came by.
Wow.
So it's tough. So no, that is true. That is true. And I have, and there have been times in the past where I've thought like maybe we should switch this to a just indie wrestling podcast. And then you guys made the excellent point where it's like, nah, but you still need you need more history, and B, if we're gonna have guests on, they're gonna want to talk about their memories of wrestling growing up, which means WWE.
It is a difficult thing to parse. I mean, I'd rather talk about some more esoteric stuff. But first of all, that's kind of a smaller net to choose from. Like, everybody has all this context. Wrestling fans, for better or for worse, if we say, Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio in the ladder match for custody of Dominic, they know what you're talking about. You saw that and we're finally getting to this match at the end of today's episode. You saw that as a meme because now the promotional poster for that match is going around. Like, remember this actually happened? People are like, no. And then they Google it and they're like, oh, that actually happened.
And it really is the, I mean, like when wrestling is often described as a soap opera, and it like is in structure largely, but you rarely see it really fucking hit.
Yeah.
2005 SmackDown was a telenovela. Like, straight fucking.
Yeah.
2020 Raw is a telenovela now.
Not on a level like this, but yeah, the
right,
Thunderdome
but like
has
the
had some interesting
Mysterio
stuff.
telenovela is back.
Oh,
Right.
That's right, because Dominic's back.
Right.
Oh
and
my
now they're
God.
doing the same fucking storyline with his daughter. Seriously.
Oh, really? Where? But
Yes.
who's possibly the father of his daughter?
I don't know, but Rollins said something calling into question whether she was really his daughter.
That would be really funny if like Seth Rollins was like, I'm the real father of your daughter, and then she came out and like had a skateboard but like didn't ride it.
All right. So wait, I do want to say some more things
It's a
this
motorcycle.
Yes.
about this first match. So first of all, I really like how we learn about Brock in this match. That no matter how injured and damaged he is, he can still fucking suplex you to hell. Like
They are mere flesh wounds.
Brock just knows farm and suplex.
Exactly.
Brock just knows farm and suplex.
Farm and suplex.
I don't know if I said this before on this podcast, but Jim Cornette described having problems training Brock Lesnar because they tell him to do performative stuff like, okay, instead of just running across the ring and squishing the guy in the turnbuckle, take 3 or 4 steps in place, like in the cartoons, how they run in place before they go, to which Brock would just say, I didn't watch any cartoons when I was a kid. I just worked on the farm.
They say he's from Minneapolis, which I mean, their farm's outside of Minneapolis. Maybe that's what that means.
People in rural areas will identify the biggest place that you have heard of, because you don't want to be like, I'm from Moose Balls, Arkansas. You don't know where that is.
So at the end of this match, there's a ref bump. Brock gets the belt, and he's going to hit Eddie with the belt. And then a moment that maybe the moment that wrestling fans are most ambivalent about in the history of wrestling happens. When Goldberg comes out, hits Brock Lesnar with the spear, allowing Eddie Guerrero to win the match. And it's like, thank you, Goldberg, for doing this thing, but also, it's fucking Goldberg.
Right.
Just the second.
Not, judging by the ingredients, I'm not surprised that you watched this match and was like, I don't even know if I can do this.
It was Goldberg. Evan immediately just poops his pants whenever Goldberg
I will say
shows
it
up.
was not actually, and once again, it wasn't a. I did not hate this match. It was honestly just that I watched it and I was like, I have nothing to say. Like, I do, like, not even negative thing. Like, Goldberg showed up, but then he did something I kind of liked, and I was like, oh, this seems like a decent use of Bill Goldberg. I get, like, I'm not, and like that was, it was more just a fear. I've had a fear that my contributions to this are running stagnant because my feelings about wrestling are kind of like stagnated, like kind of like got to a certain point around the Orange Cassidy episode and have sort of been in that same place the whole time. And so I was this, and then the next match with Kurt Angle, I think I was just concerned about coming out of them with just nothing to say and no feelings at all.
You see, that puts a piece to this puzzle together in my head. And tell me if I'm on base or way off base with this. You watched all that Orange Cassidy stuff. He's the first wrestler that really like connected with you on kind of an emotional level. You were like, oh, I get it now. You watched his match with Jericho on TV and you messaged us, oh, I get sports now. So now you see all this wrestling and you're like, this is good, but I don't care about it. And that's what being a wrestling fan is. You don't want to see stuff you don't care about. You want to be made to care about the thing instead of just coldly analyzing it. And
I think you're right, and I think like part of that is context. Part of that is I just because I get with Eddie and Kurt, it was especially strange because Orange is my favorite wrestler pretty much ever at this point, but I really like Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero. I guess I was not invested in one winning over the other.
Yeah, like you weren't in the position that we were in, like hoping that maybe Eddie Guerrero could possibly win.
Yeah,
like you either already knew that he was probably going to win at least the Lesnar match, maybe. And since it's in the past, like, you know, you're not gonna.
I do not care for things in the past. We all know that.
Yeah. I do know this. Yes.
So wait, let's just get to the end of this match. So I like a little bit of the mechanics here. Eddie Guerrero waits for the crowd to chant for him before he goes for the cover after the spear on Brock Lesnar. And that's like a really important detail that makes Eddie one of the greatest, is he waits. He waits for the crowd to do their thing, and then he covers Brock, and Brock kicks out. So then, like, they did a really good job of messing with our expectations, and they go, oh shit, Eddie might actually win now. Oh no, he didn't. All right, that means he's definitely not going to win.
Right, that was the high point of the match, that near fall.
That near fall, exactly. And then Brock goes for the F5. Eddie reverses it and DDTs him almost onto the belt. It was supposed to be on the belt.
It was on the belt, Ben. That's why Brock was knocked out.
His arm hit the belt, and Taz is like, Eddie cheated! And then, you know, he hits the frog splash and he wins it. And it all builds into this character of Eddie Guerrero where he lies, cheats, and steals, which is something we should also talk about a bunch here. That, you know, you have the protagonist, you have the great hero who is explicitly telling you that he's dishonest, that he's cheating, and the crowd loves him for it. And we've never had that before in the history of wrestling, after.
It seems like when he becomes a heel, all he really does is just turn that dial just a little higher and just then be kind of a dick about it. Whereas before he was not so much of a dick about it. But it's like it's exactly the same character. He's just like more in your face, I guess.
Yeah, the comment on the human nature of it, you know, we can say all we want. We like fair play. Truth is, he was just doing it to somebody we liked instead of somebody we didn't.
Yeah. And he was being like, his motivations were wrong. You know, with the whole Ray thing, as we'll talk about more, you know, he's acting because he can't beat Ray. And like, come on, fuck you, man. You know, like, so you can't beat Ray. Like, you're doing all this shit. Whereas before, you know, his motivation was this whole redemption story. Redemption story.
So on to his big match with Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20. Now, one thing on top of all of the story to this match is that this match was supposed to be a big main event style match at WrestleMania. It wasn't like, oh, this match is building to the next match. No, this was the match. This was, you know, Kurt Angle, the ridiculous wrestling prodigy of the previous 5 years, versus Eddie Guerrero, the veteran that was at the peak of his game and finally won the title. And they go at it. Kurt Angle is a machine, and he has those steely eyes and that neck that doesn't bend. And Eddie Guerrero is going to do everything it takes to bend it.
speaking of the steely eyes, the story leading into this match is great. The heel turn is one of my favorite ever because it was a really slow burn. Before even No Way Out, the night of the SmackDown Royal Rumble, Eddie Guerrero gets jumped in the locker room. And we don't know who it is. They make you think it was Chavo.
Because he'd been feuding with Chavo.
Because he'd been feuding with Chavo. Weeks later, Angle apparently gets jumped in the back. And then weeks after that, there's a main event match between Eddie and Chavo. The referee gets jumped. And they make Angle the referee. And Angle and Eddie had been buddies. You know, so like it didn't occur to me what was going to happen, though in hindsight, it seems obvious that Angle was the ref. He counts 1, 2, and then he doesn't count 3. Eddie looks at him. He looks back at him with this fucking maniacal serial killer grin.
Yeah, we all know the one.
And then beats the living shit out of Eddie Guerrero. It was brilliantly executed, this whole thing. And then we get a great match, which, you know, I agree, Evan, you know, there's not a lot to say about it besides their technique was awesome, subtle reversals that were really cool, and then the finish was brilliant. And it was one of these great examples of Eddie bending the rules, or, you know, in this case, he did cheat a little bit, but it was just, you know, him using his craftiness and ingenuity to defeat the guy who it was probably, objectively speaking, the better wrestler.
Well, you can't beat Kurt Angle just by out wrestling him. You can be up to as good of a wrestler as Kurt Angle, but you can't be better than him. That's his whole character. So you have to figure out another way to beat him, and Eddie did.
Yeah, he keeps reversing the ankle locks, but, you know, eventually he's going to tap to that ankle lock. So when Kurt's out of the ring, he loosens his boot, he unties it, and so when Angle puts him in the ankle lock and yanks on it, the boot comes off. Angle is surprised, and then when he turns around, Eddie Guerrero rolls him up in a really nice, tight, small package, and then hooks the bottom rope with his feet, which is the actual cheating of it, and gets the 3 count. One of my favorite finishes in wrestling history.
Oh no, it was great. The shoe coming off is a magical moment.
And it also really works with, because what you want to do with Kurt Angle, because you're not just beating him in a wrestling match, but you also want to beat his morality, right? Because Kurt Angle's like, no, we're going to do things the right way, and we're going to follow the rules, and then so like what you want to do is like cheat and then be like, see, Kurt, it doesn't fucking matter if you what you believe doesn't matter. What you believe isn't real, Mr. America, Mr. Everything works out great as if you just work hard and do the right thing. No, fuck you.
And not
I
just
might
that,
be projecting slightly.
No,
Yeah,
you've pretty much got it.
But the whole story is Angle being like, oh, you know, we don't want this drug addict to be our champion. Like, you need a champion you can believe in.
Ironic.
Right. Yeah, at the time, Eddie was recovered mostly from drugs. He was probably still on steroids. But Kurt Angle was deep into his own drug problem.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we all know that really Angle just wants to be the champion. That's what this is all really about. And that reflects in the later heel turn of Eddie, where Eddie's saying all this shit about how he's Dominic's real father and all that, whereas really it's that he just can't beat Ray. And it's this, you know, self-deception that sometimes makes someone a heel. You know, they're not being honest with themselves about their own motivations. I just want to say one last thing about WrestleMania 20.
Oh, yeah.
It was fucking magical indeed. Everything about it is magical. This is, I think, the 5th match we've covered from it, which means it's the WrestleMania we've covered the most matches from, and we're not quite done yet. Walking to WrestleMania in right next to Penn Station in the middle of Manhattan, having the feelings that I was describing earlier, it felt impossible to me. It was like, we're going to get struck down by lightning. Like, the whole place is going to explode, literally. Like, there's going to be something is going to prevent us from witnessing this incredible event. And it didn't. Instead, it was just as an amazing show as it should have been.
It's kind of like those 3 weeks in February where we really all thought that maybe Bernie Sanders was going to get the nomination.
Yeah.
And it was
that
like,
nice.
oh, maybe, just maybe. Oh, no. Oh, never
no.
mind. Oh, no. Oh, it just keeps going. Oh, God, we're all dying. Yeah.
Now, the end of, at the same time of what I just said, the end of WrestleMania now has taken on this horrible, tragic, dark cloud.
What happens at
because
the
of
end?
what happened to Eddie and Benoit.
Oh.
Well, what happens at the end, we're going to watch what happens at the end for the mini-sode for this week. So we'll get into all of that a lot more. But it is the most problematic, troubling, just deeply sad, painful thing for wrestling fans.
Oh, dear.
We'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah.
Speaking of sad and painful stories, how about this ladder match? Okay, so I've said several times, and we've already talked about it this episode, they decided to make SmackDown as much of a telenovela as they can. They put their top Latin stars on top, the biggest featured, stories that they could between Eddie and Rey and Batista, and they decided to go full on in with these storylines. And Eddie was, oh my God, his performances were incredible during this.
Compared to everything we have watched so far, this blew everything out of the fucking water. Just in terms of what you would want to see in if you're not just watching a pure wrestling match, right? If you're gonna put story in there, fucking do this shit.
Just go all out.
I don't care about any of this. I think I'm the better wrestler, so let us have a wrestling contest in which we see who's the better No, I don't give a shit. I want your son, because he's my son. I'm going to hit you with a ladder.
Yes.
Until that's a fucking story. Don't waste my time.
Is it true, Dad?
Oh my God.
Okay.
Dominic will
nails
be
it.
the greatest wrestler who ever lived eventually, right? I mean, how
It
is he
was
not
at
gonna
that
be?
moment
At
we
8 years
knew.
old, at 8 years old, he was a better actor than 95% of the roster.
I was watching it with Laura, and she was like, "Wait, this isn't real, right?" Because he was just so good in that moment.
His little sad faces that they pepper in throughout the whole thing are amazing.
Oh my God,
It's
it's all so
incredible.
beautiful. Dominic does so well, and I'm so happy he's out now and being a great wrestler. And it tickles me so much because we were watching every week at this point. We were hooked on this stuff.
Yeah,
We all hated it, but we all loved it.
Yeah, no, we thought it was in bad taste, but just the tastiest bad taste. So it starts in May of 2005. Eddie turns on Rey. They're attacked. Eddie can't beat Rey. He keeps losing he lost him to him at WrestleMania. We watched that match at WrestleMania 21. He can't beat Rey. They're a tag team for a little while. Eventually, Eddie turns on him and takes his mask. So in this promo on May 19th, Eddie comes out with the mask, gets in the ring, scowls at the audience, they're chanting, Eddie sucks, Eddie sucks. He picks up the mic several times like he's going to say anything, and instead of saying anything, he just scowls more deeply.
Yeah.
Looks at the mask, finally throws it on the mat, stomps it out with his fucking alligator shoes.
Snakeskin, alligator, whatever. Something
Whatever
like
it fucking was.
Lizard boots.
Yeah. Boots from a fucking cold-blooded dead animal.
Yeah.
And then just leaves. And when he leaves, they boo even harder. And that's just all he fucking needed to do. It's the greatest heel promo in history, and he didn't say a damn word.
Yeah, I think I can only think of 3 wrestlers that have pulled off the silent promo ever. And it's Eddie Guerrero here as a heel. It's Chris Jericho as a babyface. One of the times he came back after one of his long absences, they play his music. He comes out. He does his whole come on baby thing. He grabs the mic. He runs around the ring again and slaps hands. He gets in the ring. He waves his arms and everyone cheers. He gets back out of the ring and slaps more hands. And then he leaves to the bafflement of the audience. He doesn't
And he did
say
that
a
for
thing.
a couple weeks in a row.
Yeah. Then he turned heel and had one of the best runs of his career. And the second and the third one was almost silent, and it was Roman Reigns after he beat The Undertaker. He came out on Raw, and for like 10 straight minutes, the crowd just booed him, and he had the wherewithal not to say anything. He cut whatever planned promo he had down just to him saying at the end, "It's my yard now." Then he dropped the mic, walked away.
Ciampa did one on
NXT,
NXT too.
Oh, yeah, Ciampa did one, I guess.
Yeah, which was pretty much just a rip-off of the Eddie one.
Yeah, that's
it
why I
still
said
worked
pulled off. It was
for that
okay.
crowd. Yeah. Well, I mean, the crowd went with it, so.
The NXT crowd goes with everything.
It's true. Yeah. Okay, so now. Wait, so Evan, what give us your feelings on this silent promo.
Oh, I just while I was the thing that I said up top about Eddie's acting skill existing in this weird area where it's like considerably better than the vast majority of wrestlers, but is not. It's still not. He's just lying. That's what it is. He's just better at lying. He's the best at lying. Is what it is, kind of what it comes down to, because it's like, yeah, it is not a cinematic kind of acting at all. It is not. He reminds me of, like, all right. So I grew up in Lower Manhattan in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and there were fucking con artists everywhere. Every day of most of my life up until I was until I moved to Queens when I was 20, it's just guys constantly come up to you like, "Oh my god, dude, so I live over there on Bleecker and McDougal, right? And I fucking locked my keys and this endless stream of carnies basically coming to sucker you out of your bullshit. This was like after they got rid of 3-card Monty on the street and they had to fucking think of a new fucking deal. And like Eddie's just like that. He's the best because sometimes you would just tell those guys like fuck you and they would give you a really forlorn face, like one last shot to see like, oh, can I convince you that I'm for real? And that is what Eddie is doing in that moment, where he is selling you something, and it's beautiful. Yeah,
you believe he has those emotions, like 100%. And the funny thing about it is he's, from all reports, was just a really genuine person backstage. You know, he had that ability, but he mostly used it for good, or at least for being a successful wrestler and not, conning people out of their life savings. So this ability of Eddie to lie and how that plays into his character brings us to the July 28th, 2005 episode of SmackDown, where Eddie has been saying he has a secret about Rey Mysterio. He's threatening to reveal it. Ray doesn't want him to. They have a match at the Great American Bash where Eddie says if he loses, he won't reveal the secret. Ray beats him. This is the SmackDown after that. Ray comes out with Dominic like, oh, thank you, fans. Like, thankfully, we're past this whole thing.
Ray's never watched wrestling before, apparently.
Right. Eddie comes out. He's like, I know I promised that I wouldn't reveal the secret if you beat me. But guess what? I lied.
He lied.
He lied. Just the way he delivers, that's such a simple line. It's such high character word. I lied. It's like you can't convince me now otherwise that there's a reason to not do it. I was going to do it anyway. Fully I'm not deceiving you now. I lied about that. Isn't that great? So,
I'm not going to go anywhere near your son.
Man.
Yeah, because Dominic,
so
I'm your real poppy.
So they just, by the way, put on sale the retro Eddie Guerrero I'm Your Poppy t-shirts on the WWE shop, because they brought this up on Raw this week, or last week, apparently. Seth Rollins reminded Rey Mysterio, the paternity test on Dominic, right? And we're like, yeah, Seth, we know. We've as I established earlier in this episode, everyone watching has been watching for decades, because you're not picking up any new fans.
And so then after Dominic's like, is it true, Dad? And like runs off.
Katie, do the voice again.
Yeah, do it.
Is it true, Dad? Is it really true?
Thank you.
he is the most forlorn kid. I'm so, they're lucky that he was born into a wrestling family and just wanted to be a wrestler, because he could have gone and crushed child acting. He could have absolutely, he's so much better than so many kids you see in movies of just the truly lost
eyes.
little boy. Yeah, is it true?
Like cartoonish sad eyes.
And so then after he runs off, Eddie gets in the ring and continues the story in the nastiest fucking way.
He gets a chair, he has them lower the lights, he opens this storybook he had printed apparently. And then he's such a heel even in the story, just the way he describes himself. Because he's trying to talk about his redemption story a little, but no, he's like, well, let me be nasty also.
The way he describes the woman he impregnated.
Oh, he's such a piece of shit about it.
Oh, it's mean, and the whole thing is so fucking horrible.
Not an appropriate children's book. I feel like he was not aware of that, because, especially he's doing this thing with his voice that is not only unpleasant to listen to, not only villainous, but I feel
it sounds like he yelled too much the night before and has a sore throat.
And it starts doing this thing where I feel like when you hear somebody talk like that for a while, your mirror neurons start firing, and you sort of feel in your own throat, because he's doing something that it doesn't quite sound like he's sick. It doesn't quite sound like he's fucked up his voice. He's it's a very controlled, very specific kind of rasp/whine. I don't know. I was lost in the sound of it. It was fascinating.
So I have a personal story about this as well, and how dangerous sort of this kind of emotionally charged storyline can be. So that summer I was volunteering at the Bellevue Psychiatric Ward.
I know that place.
Yeah.
I know the outpatient area of that place.
Okay. Well, the inpatient area was a trip for sure. It was really interesting being there, but there was this one woman, and she had seemed fairly stable. She was a nice person. I had talked to her for a while, but she liked wrestling, and they would let them watch TV. They had network TV there in Bellevue, and she would watch SmackDown. And I came into work. I came into the ward the day after this promo aired. And she had transformed in a very bad way. She was angry. She was sullen. It looked like she had regressed in her therapy, in her treatment. And I was like, "Hey, did you watch SmackDown last night?" And she was like, "Yes, I did. It was horrible." I was like, "Oh fuck!" Damn. So it's not just kids who shouldn't be watching wrestling.
Yeah, the way Eddie just manipulated his face between each word also, it hammered it all home. It made the emotion come through in ways that people don't really recognize unless you're looking for it. And all of that, feeds into stuff like you were just saying, Ben. Him just being I'm the father probably wouldn't have done it. But the whole delivery.
Now, as for the match itself,
SummerSlam 2005, the ladder match for the custody of Dominic.
Oh boy!
Between Eddie and Ray.
Did you happen to see the promo earlier in the show with Eddie and Vicky? Because I noticed.
No, I watched the video package before.
Yeah, it was much earlier in the show.
Okay.
I figured you might have missed it. It was It was simple enough. Eddie's in the back, and Vicky comes up and says,
"I do love me some Vicky Guerrero."
Vicky's
and
great.
She was really great in this promo too.
And she comes up and basically says, "Look, everybody knows this is just about how you didn't beat Ray." And Eddie's like, "No, it's because I love Dominic, and we're gonna take him home and be a family." And Vicky's like, "No, Eddie, look, I love you. Everybody loves you. This is just about you not beating Ray. Just you don't have to do this. Get over it." And Eddie, dismisses her angrily, and she goes off in a huff. And it's just a minor promo, but I wanted to mention it.
It explains what happens in the end a little bit as well too.
Were they were married in real life, or?
Oh yeah.
Yes, for many years.
Oh yeah, she literally is his widow.
Wow. All right.
I mean, she's long remarried. It's been
Yeah,
like
yeah.
15 years, so but like
He's
that
had-
that is the woman he widowed when he died.
So this is an absolute car wreck of a match.
So yeah, here's the big question that I formed during this. I very much enjoyed the match.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was a car wreck, but it was great to watch.
It was something that, like, yeah, if we had watched this earlier in the podcast, and I would be like, man, it really looks like they're hurting themselves in each other. That's very impressive. There's got to be 5 times where they actually fuck up, right? There's got to be like 5 like
There's a
serious
few.
botches in this.
Yeah.
There's one, the one where Ray has leaned the one ladder against the other ladder, and he runs up the ladder, and Eddie's standing. He runs up the ladder that's diagonal, and Eddie's standing on the ladder that's standing straight up. And Ray back body drops Eddie onto the diagonal ladder, and both ladders collapse, and they both fall in a horrible looking way. It looked like Ray broke his back on the ladder. And my thinking during that is like, how did they expect that to go? How would it have gone correctly?
There's specifically several times throughout the match where you see one of them fall from a great height onto one leg at kind of an angle.
Oh yeah, there's a couple of rough bumps in there.
I was astonished, honestly, at the end that nobody had a broken leg.
Now,
Yeah, me too. Actually, a lot of those like leg drops, a lot of those drops on their legs from the ladder did look pretty nasty, especially with Ray, who has such a history of leg injuries.
Well, the one with Eddie towards the end is particularly significant because it was not supposed to happen. Because there's this point in the match where Eddie sets the ladder up on top of Ray and climbs to the top and almost gets the briefcase. And there's a moment where you're like, well, why isn't he just taking the briefcase down? Like, what's supposed to happen here? And eventually Ray just like kind of pushes the ladder out of the way in a way that looks unrealistic. Eddie's dangling from the ring that the briefcase is on, and then Ray pulls him down, and Eddie lands on his knee, and it looks really bad. And then you see Eddie slamming the mat and looking very angry. But in the video on the WWE Network, you can't hear what he's saying because they muted it. But what he's saying in the original video is, Katie, you want to do this?
Where the fuck was Vicky?
Yes, Vicky Guerrero was supposed to interfere at that moment in the match, but missed her cue.
Completely.
And Eddie is just screaming at the ref, where the fuck was Vicky?
Yes, that is an actual tantrum he's throwing.
Yeah, it's one of the classic Botchamania moments.
I don't know if it counts as a tantrum if you just fell from a major height and landed on your leg and probably reasonably think like, oh, I'm going to be out for 6 weeks now.
Yeah, right.
Like, even if it wasn't broken, I'm like, he wasn't getting up and doing anything for a little while, I would imagine.
Well, what
And
he had to do was the same spot again immediately,
Right,
because then they had to send out Vicky.
Because it was basically the finish.
Yeah.
Right, so Vicky comes out. So before this happens, Doc, say what you're going to say.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't really blame Vicky. She's was very new to the business. I mean, she
wasn't in. She was just his wife,
Yeah, she was doing a real life guest spot. So she was probably standing in the back with a representative from the WWE, one of the agents, whose job it was to be like, Vicky now. And they probably just didn't identify that was the ladder spot of all the ladder spots that they had to send Vicky out on. So I'm sure somebody got yelled at by Vince for that.
When Vicky does come out, she pushes Eddie off the ladder, holds him back while Ray climbs it and gets the briefcase to win. And then at the end, Ray hits Eddie with the briefcase and everybody's happy. But before all of that, there's the spot where Eddie's about to get the briefcase and Dominic comes in the ring and shakes the ladder. And then Eddie menaces him. And that was a wonderful moment in the match as well.
Oh yeah, Eddie just yelling at a child in front of Madison Square Garden, like, it's hilarious.
Or this one wasn't in the Garden, was it?
The WrestleMania match was in the Garden. This one was, I think this one is in San Francisco.
That's right, the Cow Palace.
At the Cow Palace, I think.
So other thoughts about the match, Evan?
No, I mean, like, yeah, I thought it was. even with all the fuck ups and everything, I thought it was still like well paced, and they like I guess there was a lot of like they didn't really do anything that like cool necessarily, but they just yeah, I thought that Ray like very convincingly like ran up and like beat the shit out of him after Eddie was yelling at his child. Just the like displayed real like father rage there in that moment. There was a second. I also wondered. There's a moment where Eddie landed on the second rope, and then like waits there for a few seconds, and then turns back, and Ray is just like on the ground like dead. And I in my head I was wondering, I'm like, oh, I wonder if there was maybe supposed to be a 619 there or something. But
It's
Ray
possible.
was like actually like, oh, I'm concussed. I'm not fucking getting up right now. Like
They did the 619 at one point with Eddie holding the ladder, and then he did the drop the dime with the ladder on top of him. There was some cool innovative stuff thrown in there for sure.
Yeah, at the beginning of the match, as they were presenting the story, I thought it was interesting the way they presented it. They didn't say anything like Ray was at all in the wrong because they acted as though it was an adoption without the papers. And Michael Cole, who almost never talks at all about himself. And Michael Cole's an interesting figure. He was a war correspondent in the Gulf War. He's seen action, you know. But he says at the beginning of the match, you know, I have 2 boys and I adopted both of them, and I'm their father. I'm definitely their father, so I know what it's like to like this. So I'm rooting for Rey Mysterio in this one. Come on, he's Dominic's father.
These are real insecurities that people have, right? Like adopted kids have insecurities about being adopted. Parents who maybe couldn't conceive for one reason or another have insecurities about that. And wrestling stories are really good when they play on people's insecurities and you get that visceral emotion out of it. And that's, I think, why family stories work so well in wrestling, because everyone can relate. And everyone has all sorts of fucking family baggage. Crazy thing to think about from the perspective of Dominic is what his life must have been like going to school when this storyline was happening and people being like, which one is your real father? Like
I hope it didn't warp him, you know?
Apparently, he didn't try to keep the kayfabe with his his friends.
That's good.
Like, no, Ray is my.
I'm glad that Ray was not that hardcore in the wrestling world. It's like, no, you have to see like if Dominic had been a Hart, he would have been fucked.
Oh yeah,
yeah, completely.
I mean, 10, 20 years previous for anyone.
Yeah.
Like
a lot of wrestlers would they would kayfabe their kids, they would kayfabe their wives, you know. There's one story, I can't remember the names involved, but it was a territory story from the 70s or the early 80s where there was a guy who kayfabed his wife who didn't really believe him, but whatever, it was her husband's business, right? It should just say, oh, wrestling's real. She's like, whatever, bring home your paycheck. And one night they had in town a $10,000 battle royal where the winner would get $10,000.
Oh, I know this story.
Yeah, and but there wasn't $10,000 to be given to anybody. It was an act. And so the guy wins the battle royal, gets a bag with a dollar sign on it or something, right? And he doesn't get $10,000. And he drives home, and his wife is waiting for him on the porch with their gun. Like, hey, where's the money? You got the money? I saw you won $10,000. You're going to give some of it to me, right? And he had to not go home and go to the promoter's house and be like, you have to come with me and tell my wife what wrestling is or she's going to kill me. And they took care of it. But that's what it used to be like in a lot of places. It was strictly, you tell nobody ever what this is. Meanwhile, wrestling fans have always known what wrestling was. Anybody that tells you otherwise doesn't know the history of wrestling. The first book published about what wrestling was is called Fall Guys. It came out in the 30s. So people know what wrestling is. So don't try and bullshit your wife about it, please. Right, so Dominic didn't have to deal with that because Rey Mysterio is an intelligent guy, and there you go.
And wrestling had,
Yes,
largely revealed itself by then.
Well, Vince McMahon specifically said to the press and everybody in the late 80s, we are not really a sport, to get around having to pay taxes as though they're a sport. Which, I mean, I think that Vince McMahon has done a lot of shady things to get around paying taxes. This is not one of them. He is not running a sport.
All right, let's start winding this down.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you guys have any final thoughts here?
Well, Eddie Guerrero is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. The
Amazing.
saddest part about all this is a few months afterwards, he'd be gone. And, I'm just glad we had him when we did.
We'll get into the last days of him in the premium episode, complementing this one. There's still a little bit more Eddie for us to show you, Evan, to get the full picture. But yeah, but this run, again, I'm just going to reiterate how meaningful this was to us at the time it was happening. It's, this and, the stories that I was watching when I was like 8 years old are the wrestling stories that have meant the most to me. And like a little bit of Ring of Honor a couple of years after this too.
Katie, you were still a new fan, as you said, when this happened. When you tuned in, Eddie was one of the top acts in wrestling. Could you give us a few words about your take on it?
I just Eddie was one of my very early favorites, and like he really just generally impacted me in a very large way. Like everything he did was gold. There's not much more I can say about it. Like he's one of my favorites of all time. It's crazy how he did all this stuff, and then 6 months after it, even 4 months after it, like what the last thing we watched was in July, and he died in November. He was gone forever, and it was devastating. This was 2005. I was 17 when he died.
Yeah, through all of this, imagine he's doing all of this stuff, like with a heart that
is about to give out. Yeah,
exactly.
I feel like, at the end of this series, well, not quite the end, subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/contestingwrestling, $5 a month. You get an extra episode every week.
They're good. We have a lot of them by now. You'll get a lot of extra content. Go on.
I think the premium for the first Eddie episode was premium 50. So we've got 50 hours plus for you. I really like Eddie. The crisis that I had watching this about the creativity of the podcast really came from the fact that I was watching somebody who I have come to really appreciate and think is a great wrestler, and felt like I didn't have anything particularly original to say about him. Like I felt it almost like I had like a crisis, an artistic crisis about this podcast, because I was worried I in part couldn't really like do justice to Eddie a little bit, or like I didn't know. I don't know. I think this feels like maybe we're into season 3 now after this or something like that. Like Cassidy to now was season 2, where Eddie was, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I have learned a lot about what wrestling is supposed to be from watching Eddie Guerrero, because it does. I feel like I could say, honestly, at least from everybody that we have watched so far, Eddie is not my favorite wrestler, but I do think Eddie is the best wrestler that we have covered in terms of what he could do in the context of wrestling.
Yeah, and I mean, to Katie's point earlier, now you're going to have the context to really criticize wrestlers that are not as good as Eddie Guerrero as we watch bad shit,
I'm not looking forward to it. I won't lie to you.
Or stuff that's just not quite as good. Yeah.
But I am looking forward to doing more episodes of this podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, check out the Patreon I mentioned a few minutes ago. Follow us on Twitter @ContestingW. Let us know your thoughts, your feelings, if there's anything you think we should cover. And
we're going to keep doing it whether Evan likes it or not.
Yeah. I'm trapped in a hellscape of my own creation.
We'll work it out.
Yeah, it's great. It's good stuff. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you.